You believe you are in control of your life. You believe you choose what you think, what you feel, what you do. That you decide what to watch, what to buy, who to trust, who to love, and even who you are. But what if I told you that this might be nothing more than an extremely well-constructed illusion? What if, right now, as you're hearing this, your brain has already decided to keep watching, before you even chose to stay? Even worse, what if all your choices, from the simplest to the most important, are being made before you have any awareness of them? Take a second, because what you're about to understand isn't just uncomfortable, it's disturbing. And after this, you might never fully trust your own mind again. It all starts with a question that seems simple, but breaks everything apart. Who, exactly, is making your choices? It feels obvious to answer, me. But when you try to find that me, it starts to slip away. You decide to get out of bed in the morning, or at least you think you do. But think carefully. Where did that decision come from? Did you choose to feel like getting up? Or did the feeling simply appear? Did you choose to feel motivated or unmotivated? Did you choose discipline or laziness? Or do these things just arise within you, like thoughts you never invited? Neuroscience began investigating this in a brutally objective way, and the results are, at the very least, unsettling. In a classic experiment conducted by Benjamin Libet, participants were given a simple task: press a button whenever they felt like it. Nothing complex, no pressure. But while they were doing it, their brains were being monitored. And something unexpected happened. Before the person reported that they had decided to press the button, their brain was already showing electrical activity, indicating that the decision had been made. Not milliseconds after, before. The brain decided first. Consciousness came later, like a delayed narrator trying to justify something that had already happened. Now think about this deeply. If your brain decides before you know it, then who is in control? This experiment wasn't an isolated case. More recent studies using functional MRI have been able to predict simple decisions up to 7 seconds before a person becomes aware of their choice. 7 seconds. In brain terms, that's an eternity. It's as if you're watching a movie, thinking you're directing the story. But the script has already been written, and you're just following along. This is where things start to get truly uncomfortable, because we're not just talking about simple decisions like pressing a button. We're talking about everything. What you buy, what you believe, the opinions you defend with absolute certainty, the political positions you think you chose rationally, the people you judge, the content you consume. All of this may be the result of unconscious processes that happen long before your conscious mind enters the scene. And still, you feel like you chose. That's the most dangerous part, the feeling of control. Nietzsche suggested something similar long before neuroscience existed. He argued that human beings create narratives to make sense of internal chaos. In other words, you don't control your decisions. You tell stories about them afterward. And that leads us to an even deeper question. If you don't control your choices, then what does? To understand that, we need to go one level deeper. And this is where one of the most important and most ignored concepts of the human mind comes in: the unconscious. Carl Jung believed that a large part of our psychic life happens outside of conscious awareness. He said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about it. How many times have you made decisions you couldn't later explain? How many times have you reacted impulsively and only afterward tried to justify it? How many times have you said, "I don't know why I did that"? These aren't random mistakes. They're signals, signs that there is a deeper structure operating behind your perception. A structure shaped by past experiences, trauma, social patterns, biology, culture, and even things you no longer remember. And this structure doesn't ask for your permission. It simply acts. Now let's bring this into the modern world. You open a social media app, scroll through your feed, stop at a specific video. Why? You think it was your choice. But in reality, that video was carefully positioned to capture your attention based on patterns you don't even know you have. Your previous clicks, your watch time, your micro movements, your emotional vulnerability at that exact moment. You didn't choose that video. You were guided to it. And when you decide to watch, your brain was already leaning toward it before you realized. Then you think, I liked this content. But did you really? Or were you conditioned to like it? This is where one of the most dangerous cognitive traps comes in: rationalization. Your brain makes an unconscious decision and then creates a logical explanation to justify it. It's like a brilliant lawyer defending a guilty client. It's not searching for truth. It's searching for convincing arguments, and you believe them. This mechanism is so powerful that it shapes even your deepest beliefs. You believe what you believe because it makes sense. But most of the time, the making sense comes after the belief is already in place. You don't arrive at conclusions. You start with them and then build paths to support them. That explains why debates rarely change opinions. People aren't searching for truth. They're protecting decisions that were already made at an unconscious level. And the more intelligent they are, the better they become at justifying those decisions. Now let's go one step further. If your decisions are influenced by unconscious processes, and those processes are shaped by external factors, then you're not just out of control, you're influenceable. And that opens the door to something even more unsettling: manipulation. Machiavelli understood this with unsettling clarity. He knew that power doesn't come from directly controlling people, but from influencing the conditions that shape their decisions. You don't need to force someone to do something. You just need to create the right environment, and they will choose it on their own. Today, this happens on a global scale. Algorithms don't just show content, they shape behavior. They learn your patterns better than you do. They know when you're vulnerable, when you're more susceptible, when you're tired, anxious, lonely. And in those moments, they push exactly the kind of stimulus that increases engagement. You think you're in control, but you're being guided. And the most dangerous part, you like it, because the system is designed to reward you. Dopamine, validation, belonging, small pleasures that reinforce patterns. And the more you repeat them, the more automatic they become. Until you reach a point where you don't even notice anymore. You just react. This doesn't stop at the internet. It extends to relationships, social environments, culture, family. Since childhood, you've been conditioned. You were told what is right, what is wrong, what success is, what failure is, what you should want, what you should avoid. And you internalized all of it, not as external rules, but as part of who you are. And now, when you choose something, you're often just following a script that was written long before you became aware of it. Socrates said, "Know thyself." But maybe he was pointing to something even deeper. Maybe the real problem is that you believe you already know yourself, when in reality, you only know the surface. And the surface doesn't make decisions. Now comes the most uncomfortable part of all. If you don't control your choices, if your decisions are shaped by unconscious processes, if you are constantly influenced by external factors, then is there any real freedom Or is it all just a sophisticated illusion? Before answering that, we need to understand something fundamental. Not all systems in your brain operate the same way. There is a constant conflict happening within you. A conflict you feel, but rarely notice. On one side, fast, automatic, emotional processes. On the other, slow, rational, conscious processes. You believe the rational side is in control, but most of the time, it arrives too late. It doesn't decide. It explains. And that changes everything. Because it means that the version of you that believes it's in control is just a small part of something much larger. A part that observes, interprets, and tries to organize, but doesn't necessarily lead. This is exactly what Stoicism tried to teach, indirectly. Not to control the external world, but to understand what is and isn't under your internal control. The problem is that maybe far less is under your control than you think. And this is where the narrative begins to turn. Because so far, everything points to an uncomfortable conclusion. You don't choose. You are chosen. But there is one detail, a single detail, that completely changes the game. A detail most people ignore. A blind spot that separates those who are fully guided from those who slowly begin to reclaim some level of autonomy. But to see it, you'll need to question something even deeper. Not your choices, but who you believe you are. Because maybe the problem was never the lack of control, but the identity you use to try to control. And this is exactly where things start to get dangerous. And this is exactly where things start to get dangerous. Because the moment you begin to question who's in control, you inevitably run into something even more unstable. The idea of me. You've always assumed there's a center inside you. A solid core that thinks, decides, chooses. But what if that center isn't so solid? What if the you believe you are is just a construction, an interface, a narrative created by the brain to organize chaos? Neuroscience has an indirect name for this, the self as a process, not an entity. There is no fixed commander in the brain. What exists is a collection of systems competing, cooperating, reacting, and generating the feeling of unity afterward. In other words, you are not a thing. You are an event. And this explains something you've already felt, but maybe never fully understood. Internal contradiction. That moment when one part of you wants to act and another holds you back. One part wants discipline, another wants immediate pleasure. One part wants to speak, another tells you to stay quiet. If there were a single central self, this shouldn't happen. But it happens all the time. Because you are not one, you are many. And those many are constantly fighting for control. Now, pay attention, because this is where everything shifts. If there is no fixed self making decisions, then who is in control at any given moment? Short answer, whichever system is strongest in that instant. And what determines which system is stronger? Conditioning, repetition, environment, emotional state, external stimuli. Everything you experience, consume, repeat, strengthens certain neural patterns, and those patterns begin to dominate your decisions automatically. That's why changing behavior is so difficult. It's not a lack of willpower, it's brain architecture. You're not fighting a conscious decision. You're fighting circuits that have been reinforced for years. Now, it becomes clear why so many people feel like they can't change, even when they want to. Because conscious wanting is weak compared to a well-trained unconscious system. It's like trying to stop a train with your bare hands. And here comes an idea that might sound counterintuitive, but it's liberating. You don't directly control your choices, but you can influence what will control them in the future. That's the point. That's the detail that changes the game. You don't choose in the moment of decision. You choose beforehand, by shaping the system that will decide for you. It sounds subtle, but it's a massive shift in perspective. Instead of trying to control impulses in the heat of the moment, you start building a structure where certain impulses simply don't appear with the same intensity. That's exactly what the Stoics practiced, even without scientific language. They didn't rely on willpower. They trained perception. They trained anticipation. They trained their internal environment. Because they knew that, in the critical moment, it's already too late. Now let's bring this into something concrete. Imagine two people. One constantly tries to resist distractions. The other completely reorganizes their environment, removes triggers, defines routines, changes consumption habits. Who do you think has more self-control? The first one seems stronger, but the second one understood the game. Because they're not fighting the system, they're reprogramming the system. And this applies to everything. Diet, productivity, relationships, addictions, beliefs, everything. You don't beat the unconscious by confronting it directly. You win by shaping it gradually. Now, this raises an inevitable question. If you can influence the system, does that mean there's some kind of freedom? Or are we still trapped? The answer is uncomfortable. There is freedom, but not in the way you imagined. It's not absolute freedom to choose anything at any moment. It's limited, conditional, gradual. You don't choose your initial thoughts, but you can choose what you do with them. You don't choose your automatic impulses, but you can choose the environments you expose yourself to, the stimuli you consume, the patterns you reinforce. And over time, these indirect choices begin to change who decides within you. Nietzsche talked about becoming who you are. But maybe that's not about discovering a fixed essence. Maybe it's about deliberately building the processes that generate your actions. You don't discover who you are, you sculpt it. But there's a silent danger here. Because the same logic that allows autonomy also allows manipulation. If you can shape your system, others can too, and they already are. Companies, platforms, governments, people around you, all influencing, directly or indirectly, the factors that shape your decisions. And most of them do it better than you, because they study behavior, they test patterns, they optimize stimuli, while you just react. And here's the most critical point of all. If you don't take responsibility for shaping your own mind, someone else will do it for you. And you won't even notice. You'll call it your opinion. You'll call it personal taste. You'll call it identity. But deep down, it will be programming. Now take a breath, because this isn't a sentence of defeat. It's an invitation. An invitation to a kind of awareness most people never develop. Awareness of the process, not the content of your thoughts, but how they arise, how they are reinforced, how they are directed. When you start observing this, something changes. You create a small space, a gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap, there is something rare, something fragile, but extremely powerful. The possibility of intervention, not total, but enough. Enough to redirect patterns, enough to interrupt cycles, enough to begin slowly rewriting the system. That's why practices like mindfulness seem so simple and yet so difficult, Because they don't give you direct control. They give you awareness. And awareness is the first step toward any real form of autonomy. Without it, you are just reaction. With it, you begin to become an agent, even if only on a small scale. Now, do you see why this is so often ignored? Because it's not comfortable. There's no quick fix, no magic formula. There's invisible work, repetition, ongoing awareness, and above all, humility. The humility to accept that you're not in control the way you thought, but also the courage to accept that you can still build something different. And that brings us to the final point, or rather, the point where everything begins again. You don't control your choices, but you can gradually influence who you become. And who you become will determine every future choice. So the question is no longer, do I have control? The question is, which part of me is being strengthened every single day? Because that version will decide for you. And maybe for the first time, you're starting to see that. If this video made you think in any way, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel Art of Awareness, because this is where we go deeper into ideas most people avoid. Like the video, because that helps this kind of content reach people who are still stuck on autopilot. And comment below, what's the last decision you were sure was completely yours, but now you're starting to question? Because sometimes awareness begins exactly like this, with a question.